Today, we're diving into the world of bassist, composer, and producer Ben Allison. With a career spanning over 30 years, Ben has developed a signature sound that fuses jazz with rock, folk, and global influences. He's collaborated with legends like Lee Konitz and Joe Lovano, scored music for NPR and film, and even performed with an 80-piece orchestra in Brazil. Whether on stage at Carnegie Hall or crafting cinematic compositions, Ben's creativity knows no bounds. So let's jump right in. So, Ben, thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I was just looking on social media and I saw that I think maybe next week or something you're going to the West Coast for this a tour with Ted Nash, right? And Steve Cardenas, right?
That's right.
So
Yeah.
that's a trio format that, we don't, I mean, I love it. I know you have, Matt Wilson plays with that group sometime. So kind of talk to me about that group, it's since inception because I love seeing drummerless trios like that. I think it's something we need to see more of, to be honest. So, how did that instrumentation come to be?
It came to be quite organically. I mean, I came to New York. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in New Haven, but I moved to New York when I was about 17. And at that time, there was a lot of many venues around the city that were basically like bass guitar, bass piano sort of venues. So bassists had a lot of work, and those kind of small group, non-drum focus groups were prevalent. So I grew up around that kind of sound, and um, didn't really deal with it in my own music until I was talking with my good pal Steve Cardenas about this and the fact and lamenting the kind of the fact that that wasn't as prevalent in New York as it used to be. And we had this idea of forming a project around that concept, namely a trio without drums that's very conversational. I mean, when you take drums out of the mix as an improviser, as a jazz improviser, it creates a lot of sonic space, a lot of room for people to kind of have an intimate conversation sonically. So that was basically the concept. We got together with Ted Nash around this idea, probably around 2011, 2012.
Hmm.
And to date, it was great. We just hit it off right away. And to date, I think we've done four albums. We're preparing to record our fifth, and we've been touring around all over the place since then. And it's just a great um,
Well, I was
kind
going
of.
to ask you if, I mean, if you were, because you were in New York, I know there was that one point at the old jazz club Bradley's where
Mhm.
there was this, some law, I don't know if it was like a cabaret law or something like that, where there just could not be drums in this one jazz club. And I was wondering if you ever, went to go see any of that and maybe that was in the back of your head. I could be totally wrong though.
You're right on the money. I live about 80 feet from where Bradley's used to be, and have since 1985. So I'm very well aware of it. Yeah, I'm not sure how deep you want to go on this. I've
No,
never
this is the
heard
rabbit
it
hole. So
before.
however you want to, whatever you want to tell me, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, New York City has a tortured history with music. It's kind of the epicenter in a lot of ways of creativity. Think of the Harlem Revolution. Think of like the music that came out of New York City in the 20s and 30s and 40s, really when jazz was becoming a genre that people would recognize. And at that time, in the 20s, not to go into a history lesson here, but since you brought it up, there were there was a lot of music happening, especially in Harlem, where people would go to listen to live jazz and dance to it and, have a good time and spill out onto the street at all hours. Revelers, think about music in the 20s and the celebration of this art form and people kind of coming together around jazz as a communal art form, but also as a, a place where a kind of music that you could dance to. Okay, so there were people in New York City who felt that was to be discouraged. They didn't like the idea, and they started passing what was called the New York City cabaret laws, which essentially made dancing illegal, made drums illegal. They couched it in terms of music that would be disruptive to the community because, we lived close together, so noise is an issue. But really, there were other things going on there, many of which were racial, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was a racist policy. That's not just my opinion. That's
Ironically, they say the drums and the music is disruptive when in fact, like there's people who live in apartments next to these nightclubs where that go all hours of the morning, or there are apartments that are right next to the train that like literally like 50 feet from where the train is in Brooklyn. If it has to be the art, of course, right? You know.
Yeah, I mean, music, this is when you're in a situation like New York City, what makes it so amazing, one of the things is the fact that it's all these people from all over the world coming together and living very closely together in tightly packed geographic area. That's awesome, mostly awesome, but also challenging,
Do
right? You
you
have to live together. So like these laws came up as really as a way to kind of address that. But the problem with them is that they tended to uh, punish people and they were used incorrectly. So, for example, if you know the history, you used to have a license, a cabaret license to perform music as an artist,
Mhm.
and the New York City government would rescind your license if for various reasons. So they would take Thelonious Monk's license so that he couldn't perform in New York City. They would take Billie Holiday's license. You brought it up, I think, and the reason I like to talk about it is that it also had an effect on the music, and one of the effects that it had was, um, making drums uh, removing drums from the equation. So there were waivers for smaller groups that didn't include drums, and some of the music we're referencing kind of comes out of the unfortunate thing of the cabaret laws led to inadvertently certain types of music that were quite interesting and beautiful, and so we're just delving into that. It's not because we're thinking about the cabaret laws. I'm just giving a little history lesson
No, no,
behind.
I love it. You know, and you're from New Haven, Connecticut, and you're also around the same age as musicians like Mike DeRubo and Brian Charette. Did you know those musicians growing up?
No, I did not. I've met them since, but
Because you guys are
that's
around the same age. They're a couple years younger, I think, but
yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't know their ages, but I do know that New York City is like the way I think about it is like a black hole in a good sense, in that it's got this gravitational weight. And so if you're within the event horizon of New York City as an artist, you're going to be pulled there. So growing up in New Haven, which is 80 83 miles away from where I live now. There was no way that I was not going to be pulled into the city.
yeah.
This is where the action is. This is where musicians come together, kind of collide together to create new things.
I also wanted to ask you kind of a specific question because you've been doing this for decades. There's a lot of, I mean, I'm in my late 30s. There's musicians who are in their 20s who are, all, with the social media, everyone is very connected on that level, and everyone knows each other on that level, but people haven't played together, but
Mhm.
they know each other or
Mhm.
they comment on each other's posts. Um, it's almost like actors who just know of each other in Hollywood, but they've just never worked together.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit strange sometimes, I think. I mean, do you still have people who you've kind of known like for about, for 20 years? So you know each other, you've spoke to them, but you just haven't worked together in that way? Like that come to mind?
Know each other. That I mean, yes, there are many musicians who I know who I've never worked with.
Who play with the same, you guys play with the same people. You may have,
Yeah, yeah.
that's
But I mean, oh God, social media, that's a big thing. I mean, it's so interesting to hear you say that you know each other through your social media posts.
oh,
I
I have
mean,
so many friends, but we
yeah.
we never
I mean,
met.
I grew up, just to kind of put it plainly, I grew up and became an adult before the internet. And I became a practicing musician and a professional before the internet existed, much less social media existed. So all of my social connections were made in person.
Yeah, with business
That would be-
cards.
Yeah, well, yeah, business cards, sure, but I mean, it was more like going to clubs and spaces and places where people met in person to make new things. I would say that's qualitatively different than meeting online and exchanging comments on social media posts. I mean, when you're in the same room at the same time, especially when you're talking about art that is personal, spontaneous, and of the moment, there really is no other way to do it.
I agree with you.
Be
Yeah.
together in the room at the same time. So that's the only way it happens.
But you do it, but you do know that there are those musicians. So, younger musicians like myself in their 20s, there is that strange feelings. But someone a little older like yourself, I'm not, you're not in your 50s, you still have those situations where you know people through people, you just haven't worked, but you're friendly in that way. So
Oh, of
it's
course.
still
Yeah.
prevalent. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've at this point, I've in my career as a musician, I've traveled to every continent. Well, maybe not Antarctica, but I've traveled to many countries on Earth and have friends and colleagues and people that I've heard, people that I've gotten to know across the planet at this point. I mean, this is the thing about music. It's the great connector. It
Sure.
probably is the greatest connector, or maybe that's my personal opinion, but it's one of the great connectors of people on Earth across any other boundary, any other kind of language, cultural, ethnic, religious, governmental, any other kind of groups of people. One of the things that connects people is music. And so, if you've been traveling the planet like I have for the last 35 years, you get to know a lot of people. And, you know, a lot of them you stay in touch with. Technology is actually good in that regard, in that it
Sure.
facilitates that. We used to have to call each other or send each other faxes, and now to just kind of check up on what someone's doing and post. But, the original connection, the connection that really to me is meaningful is when you know somebody in person, when you've met them
Well,
and played with them if you're a musician.
absolutely. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how I discovered your music because there is the positive. I mean, I discover so much music just by like I can literally get sucked in almost. Like I from one video, like I hear someone for the first time and I become very impressed or intrigued by the way they play. And like that's the first time I've heard them. And then I just go down the rabbit hole, basically. So I heard your music originally. I discovered your bass playing through the work you've done with Michael Wolff, who
Mm,
I consider almost an unsung hero of the piano.
hmm
Um, people know that he worked on, I think it was The Tonight Show and stuff, but I definitely think he's an unsung hero of the music. So how did that relationship come to be? How did you guys meet? Because I think there's just such a strong connection between the way you guys play. I mean, it's amazing. Really sounds beautiful.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Michael. We just finished a week-long run at Birdland. That's a club
Hmm.
in New York City where we were a
Quartet, right?
quartet.
Or something?
It was a quintet actually. I
Quintet.
put
Okay.
together a group that the idea was cross-generational. That was my concept with it. That is celebrating and delving into and exploring the music of Nancy Wilson and Cannonball Adderley. They made a record in the early 60s. It's this iconic jazz record. It's beautiful, but I wanted to delve into it. And Michael was actually Nancy Wilson's musical director
Hmm.
for a time, and also played in Cannonball's band. So he has this incredible history knowing those people, knowing them personally, and working with them personally. And on the other end of the spectrum, I included a student of mine who just graduated from the new school a few months ago, Cal Ferretti, a trumpet player, and then some other people that I've met on the scene in New York. Camille Thurman, fantastic saxophonist and vocalist. She's really tremendous. And Daryl Green, a drummer, who's just got this great, I've got a great rapport with kind of groove-wise. And so the idea was to bring these people together around this music. You know, this is the thing about, for me, what is so, how shall I put it, is so incredible about music and jazz in particular, and is that it's a way of sharing across generations and across cultures. You know, the music has evolved um, over the last 100 years plus, but it at its heart, it's a collaborative art form. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists when people kind of get together. So there's this shared history that we have around the music. We have different perspectives. I mean, Cal's perspective as a 22-year-old,
I love
like
it.
what he thinks is different than what Michael thinks as
No, that's what we need. That's what the world needs. I think that'd be great if it was more of it. And it's that's like almost like the anti-click. It's like let's include
Mm,
everybody from these different generations, which can you imagine how healthy that would be for
yeah, I
everybody?
can. And I think we need it.
I
And we
agree.
all, and it wasn't a surprise to me that the audiences throughout the week were just extremely receptive to the concept and to the music, of course, because what makes it work is that Michael can play some stuff that he used to play with Cannonball, and Cal can get up there and play some stuff that she heard Michael do on a record in 1973 or whatever,
Yeah.
and channel it, and it still works. And it's like we're sharing this thing that's really crossed, and it's all because Cannonball and Nancy Wilson and people like that paved the way. So
Yeah,
it's
and that's the thing too. I feel like audiences can connect with that more because audiences, it's children, grandchildren, parents and so it's the generations who go to concerts together. And when they see that on the bandstand, it probably they feel a subconscious connection, whether they know it or not, among seeing these different generations together. Um,
yeah.
I wanted to talk to you something about your bass playing as well. Uh, and I say this with the utmost respect. And whenever I try to talk about the way someone plays, like I truly say it from like admiring what they do. And I'm not an upright bass player, but the way, a lot of bass players can play very active on the bass, but
Mhm.
when they play active, dense, a lot, which I know, and I know you know how to do that so well. It's just like they can lose the time and lose the groove and lose the beat and come in on different places that totally throw off the band. But the way you do it, I feel like it's just like you've got it down to a science. So when did you learn how to do that? Like because I would think like in order to play that way, you had to probably play a lot by yourself and just play songs without, you know what I mean, and just kind of figure out like you're the whole band in itself in a way. You're in charge of the drums, you're in charge of the time and the harmony. Like, did some of your practice coming up like consist of that sort of thing?
Yes and no. I do agree and always emphasize with my students that being um, that everybody shares a responsibility when you're having a group conversation, and that, after all, is what music is. It's a conversation among people, musical conversation, that you all share equally the responsibility for all aspects of that conversation. Meaning that, saxophonists are responsible for the groove. And I, as a bass player, am responsible for the melody, et cetera, right? And so we're all sharing in that responsibility. It's a good idea to think about music in that way. That said, there are obviously sonic roles. I mean, the bass, I don't know how wonky you want to get with music theory right now, but in general terms, the bass, it's called the bass for a reason. It's the usually the bottom most note is the note that's the most that we bass players have the most responsibility for, that determines the harmony that's stacked upon it. I mean, that's one way to look at it. If you're looking at harmonic information, and also kind of the pulse. There's a lot of power that bass players have. I often speak to my students in my music theory classes and say, sure, I'll ask the piano player to play a C major chord. I'll say, okay, that what chord is that? And the room will say C major, and then I'll play an A, and I say, okay, what chord is that now?
Hmm.
Now it's a minor chord because the bass player said it was. So the bass has a kind of a role in that regard. But those are traditional roles, and they're meant to kind of give you a framework as an
Sure.
artist, but what you do with that information is really up to you. And at the end of the day, I think one of the lessons I took from one of my mentors, Joe Lovano, you mentioned him before, was he was really keen on making sure we all understood that we all have an equal responsibility in terms of that. So it's not my job to tell everyone what the harmony is and they can do whatever they want. They also have to understand it. It's not the drummer's job to tell us where the groove is. It's all of our jobs to understand that,
Ah,
etc. So we all share that responsibility. It's really a communal conversation.
yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, I hope you took what I said in the right way, that it's all coming from a good place. When if I use the word active, or it's only I meant it in a
Yeah,
compliment. So,
no, I get it.
yeah.
Totally. I understand. Yeah, and there's different, and some of it's stylistic. If you're asking about, my approach to playing, improvising,
Hmm.
like solos, for example, if it's my time to kind of emerge out of a conversation and direct it with a solo, is what we call in jazz, I would say I tend to err on the side of economy, meaning, and you wouldn't know it from our interview today, but I tend to be a person of fewer words, or at least I aspire to be somebody who tries to say more with less. Don't always succeed,
I'll take
but
care of that job as the host if you
as
want
the
me.
editor, oh,
Yeah.
okay, just cut out most of what I just said. But I think, yeah, like as an improviser, I like to try to say things, say more with less, and that may be kind of partially what you're reacting to. I'm not sure. But it's also true that people sometimes, if they're not sure what they want to say, especially when they're improvising, default to filling up space with a lot, hoping that in that process they're saying more. And that is actually a rather fundamental mistake that artists make, especially younger artists.
Have you ever thought about if you were to compare the way you play bass to a certain drummer, who that might sound like in a sense?
I listen to drummers all the time and the way they phrase things and what kind of things they say, what they can say with a little amount. Yeah.
What if if you were to compare yourself, someone from the history who's no longer here, or someone
Hmm.
present, was there anyone that comes to mind off
Billy
the top of your head?
Higgins.
Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, like right away. Frankie Dunlop, who was a big influence on me because mostly because people may not know his name as well as Billy Higgins, but Frankie played with Monk for a while, and Monk was a big influence on me as I was trying to figure out music. And I listened to a lot of Monk albums, and I think Frankie Dunlop might have been one of my favorite drummers that played with Monk. And one of the reasons he was my favorite was that he learned how to play slower grooves with such finesse and soul.
Mm.
There's actually a great interview with him where he talks at length about that, how he came on the scene as a young person, assuming that playing louder and faster was the mark of a good musician, until on the first night, Monk said something to him to the effect of, "Yeah, but how's your slow groove?" And he realized that he really couldn't groove slowly, and that was actually harder than grooving fast, playing fast tempos. So he started working on that, and that stuck with me. So
So that when you heard him say that, those in the interview, it's that was one of those moments that kind of opened, like, whoa, open, like one of those pivotal moments in just learning.
the pivotal moment happened when I heard his playing, but
Ah,
years
okay.
later I read an interview that
Mhm.
reinforced what I already knew to be true based on what I had heard.
Uh, so if I kind of thought when I was thinking about it, like, have you worked with Brian Blade before?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great example. Yeah.
because that's what came to mind when I listened to some of the stuff.
Yeah, Brian is like that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about you mentioned teaching before. So are you mostly doing one-on-one instruction as far as teaching goes?
No, virtually no one-on-one instruction, although I just
None.
got a Zoom call with a student to helping them finish a grant application. But no, I'm at the new school. I'm part-time faculty there. I've been there on and off since the 90s, but officially became a faculty member of the faculty in about 2010 or so.
Hmm.
Yeah, I teach mostly classes. Actually, it's been a wide variety of types of classes over the decades, but in the last 15 years or so, it's been focused more on the business side, for lack of a better description. So,
Really?
yeah, I was teaching a lot of ensembles, individual lessons, and things of that nature when I
Mm.
first got on campus, but then started to feel that the students weren't being kind of not just prepared, but challenged in the realm of music business, which is an important part of any artist's career, how they get out there, how they um, make things happen for themselves, right? So I pitched an entrepreneurship track as a concept, and they
Wow,
jumped.
that's
So that's
amazing.
kind of my thing over there is that side of things.
I've been kind of ranting on the podcast a little bit about I wish more music programs. I mean, they teach everybody how to play, but as far they need to teach the musicians more entrepreneurial skills. Even just learning about how to do your taxes, something as simple as that.
Yeah, I know. It's good. This is all stuff that for people of my generation, we learned on the fly because we had to, and we made a lot of mistakes along the way. So there is value in, um, kind of giving those the basic understandings of the music business
Hmm.
to students early on. The challenge is, though, for younger people is, there's a lot going on. I mean, if you're learning how to play an instrument, that is just an incredibly complicated, time-consuming, energy-dependent endeavor. So you really have to devote a lot of your waking energy to doing that. All at the same time, they're kind of pre-career, a lot of them, especially when they're undergrads. So they're thinking about that and trying, and it's harder for them to imagine why understanding how mechanical royalties work apply to them right now, you know?
Yeah.
That's the challenge is engaging students in that thinking about kind of the future and what they might need later. So you have to be careful. You can't overload them with too much information that doesn't feel relevant in the moment. So my approach is to do it in a creative way, kind of in the way that I learned, really, which is um, to try to solve problems. And then as you're trying to solve those problems, that's when you confront the business side. So, for example, when I was coming up, if you can believe it, the emphasis was not on original music.
It's
Today,
so funny. You look much younger than your actual age number. It's so funny to me. Like
uh,
you look like you're in your early 40s, or
oh no, I'm quite a bit older than that. But like when I was coming up, there was no original music wasn't. I mean, most of my mentors were like, maybe you can sneak in one of your tunes on the second set,
Oh, right, yeah. That's
right? So
nice.
our generation, if I could characterize it, I think I can say this, was part of the generation of musicians um, who really started to change the focus of jazz to be um, embracing the idea of original new music in the jazz idiom. So as much as we were really focused on the history of it and understanding of it, really we wanted to push it forward. And this is in the late 80s, early 90s when Jazz at Lincoln Center was coming online and Ken Burns' documentary. If you saw that, you would assume that jazz had died in the 60s. And there was just this kind of feeling like, um, you know, is jazz going to become a repertory art form? Is it going to become an art form that focuses on beautiful genius, important music by people who are no longer with us? Or is it going to also include new forms that people are creating? It was clear, it wasn't even an argument. It does include new music that people are creating, and now and even then it was very much an international jazz, I mean international art form. So you could go to some rural town in France and they would have their own scene. And you could go to Tokyo and there would be Tokyo jazz that was different than New York jazz. So it became a very international art form just because humans do that.
Well, I
And
learned that for the first time. I went to France. I went to Europe for the first time a few months ago, and I went to hear some music, and I was like, it had its own. It sounded like a different thing, but it was beautiful.
right.
I
It's a
loved it.
dialect of the language.
Yes, yeah. No, Ben, this has been so informative, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. And some amazing things you said, especially about the being the generational part about the group show. So just want to say thank you again for taking the time.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. And I hope I didn't go on too long.
No,
It's
it's
you
good.
have provocative questions. Thanks, pal.